Ben Mckelvey is a best-selling author and freelance writer and has been the editor-in-chief of several magazines. He's been the senior feature writer at the Sydney Morning Herald and filed for The Good Weekend, GQ, Rolling Stone, West Australian and Herald Sun newspapers. Now Ben is a celebrated author of 6 books. Several of these have received literary awards. But I'd say Ben's greatest coup has been the publication of his latest book, Mosul, by Hachette Publishers. All I'll say is if the current ADF military inquiry is intriguing you, then go read Ben's book. Because what he's written with Mosul is both sides of the war, in Afghanistan and Iraq, and our commandos and Australian ISIS fighters' stories. Hi Ben, welcome to The Informer.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your new book, Mosul. What an informative and riveting read. Now, I've got to ask you, given your work that you've done with the ADF in East Timor and Iraq, and also working independently in Iran and Afghanistan, what's your opinion of this current ADF inquiry, the Berettain report?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to talk about in regards to the Berettain report. It's something that that was necessary, I think, given the rumours that were flying around Special Operations Command. I think that finding specific blame should probably wait until we've had these court cases and that we've looked at the individuals who are involved in this.
Yep.
But if you are looking at the culture that developed within Special Operations Command, you have to understand the context. The Berettain report gives some context, which is useful
Yep.
in understanding what happened in Afghanistan, but you have to go a little further than that and understand what was happening at the time, what the conflict was like, who was involved, and whether this was a case of a few bad apples or whether it was a cultural issue.
In Mosul, which is your new book, you had extraordinary access to the Special Air Service Regiment and to Commando. How will this report, which makes some very serious claims about some of those officers, including accusing them of killing innocent civilians, how is that going to impact on the units and also on the soldiers?
Well, I'd just like to clarify that within Mosul, the people who were primarily involved in Operation Okra, which was Australia's Special Forces fight against the Islamic State, were predominantly 2nd Commando Regiment soldiers. And the reason why it was predominantly 2nd Commando, which is another regiment, there's the SASR and the 2nd Commando Regiment are the 2 gunfighting elements of the Special Operations Command. The reason why the commandos were doing this job in Iraq was because of what had happened in Afghanistan. There was an attritional nature to the work that they were doing in Afghanistan, the SAS I'm talking about now. A lot of them were suffering from PTSD. This Berettain report was on its way, so it was decided that the 2nd Commando Regiment would go and do this fight in Iraq. So going back to your question, the unit had already been affected before the Berettain report had even been announced, and so they had been stood down in international operations. As you would know, the 2nd Squadron of the SASR has already been stood down from the Australian ORBAT, which means that they will be disbanded and then reconstituted in a different way. And I think Australian politicians would be reluctant to send the SASR or any part of the Special Forces Command in international operations for some time.
How will the Berettain report impact on these soldiers?
Oh, it's affecting everyone. Obviously it's affecting the people who are involved in these killings as they should be impacted. As the legal processes sort of advance. But it's also affected everybody who was involved in the Special Operations Task Group in Afghanistan. Everybody feels like they have been, some way adversely affected by this report. And one thing that I'm hearing over and over again is that they're very disappointed by the fact that the officers are trying to absolve themselves of responsibility. The Berettain report suggests that nobody knew these illegal killings were happening above the rank of lieutenant all the way up to the generals. But a lot of the soldiers I'm talking to are saying, well, this was done in the context of a culture. It was a culture in which, killing was something that was incentivized. Obviously not illegal killing, but killing. And it's hard to believe that no officers knew that this was happening, or at least that they suspected that this was happening, and then they didn't investigate it thoroughly enough.
Very interesting point of view. I think often too, how often is it when you're dealing with politicians and they're sending and deploying troops, often the primary role of soldiers in the Special Operations Command in Afghanistan and Iraq is disguised. They use words such as neutralise, destroy and disrupt, when what they're really meaning is, of course, to actually conduct and send troops to kill people over there. Is that something that you see when the men that you're dealing with? There's that sense of also the politicians distancing themselves from ostensibly what they've required these troops to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a firewall in modern operations between what the special forces actually do and the type of language that our politicians will use. So it's highly unlikely that a politician will talk specifically about killing, but quite often killing is the specific job of the special forces, and this is definitely in the case in Mosul. They were hunting Islamic State fighters, and they were hunting Islamic State commanders. They make no bones about it. In the book, I also sort of allude to the fact that this is the first time where Australians have been hunted by the Australian Special Forces, Australian citizens who joined Islamic State. But in Afghanistan as well, there was 3 mission sets in Afghanistan. One was counter-nexus, one was disruption, and the other one was counter-leadership. And the counter-leadership mission set, the rules of engagement within that counter leadership mission set allowed soldiers to kill on sight. So killing was the job, and that's something that they have done, and that they have done legally. And now it seems they have done illegally, but it's not understood that was basically what a part of the Australian Special Forces task group was there to do.
Is it very hard for men who have trained as killers to go overseas, get deployed, and then to turn off and return to civilian life?
No, it's incredibly difficult. That's something that's detailed in Mosul. There's one soldier specifically who's on the cover of the book, and he was deployed into Iraq as a private contractor, and then he was deployed into Afghanistan a number of times as a commando team leader, and then he was deployed into Iraq again as a special forces operator in the fight against Islamic State. And it seemed that he was someone who became more and more distant with his civilian life as he had more deployments, as he was involved in more gunfights, as he was involved in more death. And it's very difficult for these guys. And my personal opinion is that we should have had a greater understanding of what our special forces operators were doing in Afghanistan, even if it's just for the purpose of alleviating the pain that they feel when they come home and they feel so distant about the things that they had done in our name as well.
Exactly. How did you gain these soldiers' trust and confidence and the access? Because I know from dealing in some of these specialist units, they're renowned for their secrecy and their tight-knit brotherhood. How did you get this amazing access for your book?
Well, it actually came from the first book that I had done with Special Operations Command. And this is something that I've done with the help of defence. Mosul is not something that I've done with the help of defence. I was writing a biography about Cameron Baird. So Cameron Baird was Australia's last Victoria Cross recipient. He received the 100th Victoria Cross, and he was awarded it posthumously. He was a commando team leader that was killed in Afghanistan in the second last rotation of Afghan operations. And I spent a lot of time with the guys in his company, or some guys especially who were out of the unit, who became friends of mine. And the trust spread from there, because I think the sort of general consensus was that they felt that the book was representative of their friend, the book being The Commando.
In the book, you give some incredibly complex details about Afghanistan and Iraq, but also some really personal and fascinating details about several of the officers' lives, like the two commando, as you've already mentioned, Ian Turner, and also the officer Nathan Knox. Now, I know even the best journos find it difficult at times to have that detachment, and they get very much involved in their stories. How did these men's lives impact on yours, specifically Ian Turner, who unfortunately, of course, has taken his own life tragically?
Well, I mean, you wouldn't be a good writer if you didn't empathically understand the subjects that you were writing about. And Ian was very much a catalyst for that book, for Mosul. And the reason that it was a catalyst was because Ian was someone that I had met when he was alive. So he was one of my sources for The Commando, the book about Cameron Baird. And he was someone who I maintained a relationship with after I'd done the interviews with The Commando. And he got in contact with me when he was in a psychiatric hospital to tell me about his post-traumatic stress disorder, which was something that was relatively taboo at the time within his regiment. When I had heard that he had taken his own life, I almost sort of felt a compulsion to write about this, especially when his wife, who is a psychologist, got in contact with me and wanted to talk to me about Ian and his life. So, a long answer short, it did affect me and it does affect me. But if it didn't affect you, then you wouldn't be doing this job.
Well, look, Ben, I thoroughly enjoyed your book, Mosul, and what I'm also going to ask you is, how do you decompress after doing a book such as this in such a short period of time? How do you decompress, and what's next for you?
Well, the best way to decompress is to do something that's not concentrating on war or the war in Afghanistan. When I was writing The Commando, I read a hell of a lot about Iraq, and I was waking up every morning at sort of 4:30 in the morning and writing, conducting interviews, talking to people who were in Iraq. And then when I finished the book, I sort of made a point of just doing a lot of exercise, reading a lot of fiction, just almost having a bit of a purge, a bit of a war purge. But having done that, and with the Berettain report coming out, I am considering writing something about the context in which that Berettain report must be understood. I haven't decided on whether to do that yet, but there was a mission set in Afghanistan that was looking at that was concentrated on the Joint Prioritized Effects List, which was a dynamic list that was held in Afghanistan within all of the Special Operations Command, and that was the list of people who could be targeted, and they could be targeted. Whether they had a weapon or not, and it's something that I'm considering writing about.
Look, thank you very much, Ben Mckelvey, for joining us today on The Informer, and best of luck with Mosul.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the time and thanks for reading.